Welcome back to Jack's Apocalypse. I'm Jack. If you're new here, this is a channel where we read submit accounts, stories that come in from people who say they actually lived through things most of us never want to experience. It was submitted by a man who identified himself as Nolan Price. He says he is 34 years old and that he worked as a ferry mechanic in Southwest Florida before the outbreak. He says every detail in this account is accurate, and I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'll just read it exactly as he wrote it, and you can make up your own mind. Also, before we get into it, if you haven't subscribed yet, there's a button right below the video. New stories uploaded almost every day, and I don't want you to miss the next one. This story is called We Found an Empty Island Resort and Turned It into Our Own Paradise during the zombie outbreak. And now, let's begin.
My name is Nolan Price. I'm a ferry mechanic. Was a ferry mechanic. I'm not sure what I am now. I'm writing this down because it needs to be written down, and I was there from the first day to the last. Someone who was there should write it. I worked out of a marina called Blue Sky Marine near Fort Myers, Florida. My job was keeping diesel engines running on commercial passenger ferries, the kind that move tourists out to the barrier islands and back. I had been doing that work for 9 years. I understood engines and tools and what happens when mechanical things break under stress. I was not particularly good at managing people, reading their motivations, or anticipating what they would do when under pressure. That gap cost me more than one bad call during the weeks I'm describing. I had been divorced for 2 years at the time. My ex-wife moved to Tallahassee after we split, and I stayed in Fort Myers in a one-room apartment above the garage at the marina. No children, no pets. No particular obligation to be home at any set time. I worked. I watched sports on Friday nights with a man named Marcus Reeve, who ran the charter fuel dock 2 slips over. That was the shape of my life. The first reports came out of Miami. A hospital issued a statement about a cluster of patients showing aggressive and disoriented behavior, following what the statement described as a rapid onset neurological episode. The television news covered it with about 2 days of urgency. Then it faded to the middle of the broadcast. I figured it was another story that gets big and disappears. I watched the first coverage, decided nothing was happening that required a response from me, and went back to work. Then it stopped fading. Reports out of Tampa, then Orlando, then Jacksonville. The footage coming through on news broadcasts stopped making sense in the way medical emergencies usually make sense. People were not just collapsing or running a fever. They were getting up from hospital beds and moving in ways that were inconsistent with any condition the newscasters could name. The vocabulary on television kept reaching for the word epidemic and landing on it without explaining what the epidemic actually did to the people it touched. A phone video came out of a Tampa emergency room. A nurse had filmed about 40 seconds through a door window. I watched it twice. I did not need to watch it a third time. I went home that evening, and I started packing a bag. Not because I had a plan, because I understood that not having a bag packed was the version of this I could not afford. That was day 7. By day 8, the highways out of Fort Myers had jammed completely. I could see the brake lights on the elevated section from my apartment window. Cars not moving in both directions. People had abandoned vehicles in the median and on the shoulder. The radio traffic reports stopped giving updated travel times and started repeating an emergency shelter announcement for a county fairground that I was pretty sure nobody was still running. I went to the marina at 6 in the morning on day 8 and Marcus was already there. He had his truck backed up to the fuel dock with the tailgate down, and he was loading plastic storage bins into the hull of his charter boat, the Coralie, which was a 32-foot diesel cruiser that Marcus had owned for 11 years. He was 51 years old, heavy-set, with short grey stubble, and hands that were thick and calloused from 3 decades of work on and around boats. He looked at me when I walked up and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Thought you'd be here early." "Where are you going?" I asked. "Somewhere with water between me and all of that." He pointed inland, past the marina offices, toward the highway overpass. There was smoke on the horizon, not a heavy column, just a dark smear at the edge of the sky that had not been there the day before. A third man was already at the dock, Reed Callahan, 26 years old. He had worked as a dockhand at Blue Sky Marine for about a year and a half. He was lean and fast and made decisions before fully thinking them through, which was a trait that had caused friction in normal circumstances and would cause a different kind of friction later. He had a hard compound bow case and 2 large duffel bags, and he was standing near the stern of the Cora Lee looking at the hull like he had already decided he was boarding. Marcus looked at Reed. He looked at me. Then he looked back at the bins. "Help me finish loading," he said. We spent 45 minutes loading the boat. Marcus had already pulled everything useful from the marina supply room: dock line, bilge pump hoses, engine oil, 2 fire extinguishers, a full flare kit, 4 life jackets, a first aid box. I added my tool bag, my personal first aid kit, and the food from my apartment: 2 boxes of protein bars, 4 cans of soup, a jar of peanut butter, and 3 liters of bottled water. Reed brought canned goods from the marina snack stand, which was unlocked because the employee who ran it had not shown up that morning. He took 3 gallons of bleach as well, which was a better decision than anything else I had expected from him. He also brought a bag of rice. When I looked at the rice, he said, "It keeps forever." He was right about that. We pulled out of the slip at 7:20 in the morning. The water in the inlet was flat and dark, going west, away from the smoke. There were other boats on the water, 2 or 3 visible in the inlet, also moving out to open water. No one communicating, everyone just moving. On the shore behind us, I could hear sirens in a layered overlap that meant more than 2 or 3 vehicles. It sounded like the city's entire emergency response was trying to answer multiple simultaneous locations and not covering any of them well. Marcus had a specific destination. He had been turning it over for about 4 days, he said, since the Tampa report started getting worse. There was a small private island about 11 miles offshore called Cayman Palms, a boutique resort, 12 bungalows, a main lodge with a full kitchen, staff quarters, a pool, a solar power system, a desalination unit, a fishing dock on each side. Access only by boat. No road, no bridge. Marcus had chartered out of Blue Sky Marine twice a year to take resort staff on a fishing day trip, and he had been to Cayman Palms 4 times over 3 years. He knew the layout. "It's been closed since February," Marcus said, at the helm, watching the inlet open up into the Gulf. Off-season maintenance, staff sent home, nobody on site. Reed was sitting on a storage bin at the bow, watching the shore get smaller. "How do you know nobody's already moved in?" "I don't," Marcus said, "but the island is 11 miles out, and the only access is by boat. If someone smart had gone there, we'd see their boats when we arrive. If nobody's found it yet, we take it. If it's already occupied, we figure out the next option from the water." That was how Marcus worked. He did not offer reassurance. He offered steps. If this, then that. I had been around him for 3 years, and I trusted the way he thought through problems more than I trusted anyone else in my life at that point, which is not a particularly impressive statement, but it was accurate. We reached Cayman Palms at 9:15 in the morning. I had seen the island before from the water, on a ferry pass years ago, but I had never docked there. It was small, roughly 800 meters end to end, and shaped something like a figure 8, with the main resort cluster on the northern loop and the staff and maintenance buildings on the southern loop, the 2 halves connected by a paved path along the center isthmus. On the north side, a wooden pedestrian causeway extended about 30 meters from the island edge to a natural sandbar, and from there a short low-paved span crossed back to the main island. The sandbar had a fringe of mangrove on its southern edge. No boats at either dock. The island was quiet. The bungalows were shut. The main lodge entrance was padlocked with a standard commercial lock that Marcus opened in less than a minute using a tool from his jacket pocket that I did not ask about. Inside the lodge, the air was cool and smelled of floor cleaner and salt. The lights were off. The solar system was running. I could hear the faint hum of the battery bank in the utility hall, and the kitchen refrigeration unit was cycling. We went into the kitchen first. Walk-in freezer. Commercial 6-burner range. Stainless steel work surface the length of 1 full wall. Shelving units full of dry goods, salt, cooking oil, rice, dried pasta, canned tomatoes, canned beans, canned corn, industrial-sized containers of sugar and flour, a separate dry pantry with condiments, vinegar, coffee, tea, protein supplement powder in sealed tubs. I stood in the middle of that kitchen and I went through the math. Reed opened the walk-in freezer, felt the cold air on his face, and said, "We hit the jackpot." I did not say anything. I understood what we had found. I also understood that understanding what you have is not the same as understanding how long it lasts, what threatens it, and what you need to do to protect it. Luck is just good conditions at one moment in time. Conditions change. We spent the rest of day one on inventory. Marcus went room to room through the 12 bungalows with a legal pad he found at the front desk. He documented furniture, bedding, toiletry stock, towels, anything with practical value. Reed covered the maintenance shed in the south loop and found the following: a riding mower, 3 golf carts with charging stations wired to the solar bank, a nail gun with 3 full strips of nails, 2 power drills with a set of charger adapters, a circular saw, a full hand tool pegboard with hammers, pliers, screwdrivers, wrenches, a hand sledge, pipe cutters, and wire strippers. Against the far wall, there were lengths of aluminum pipe and a large roll of chain link fencing material that had been sitting there waiting for a maintenance project that the February shutdown had paused. I took the engine room and power systems. The solar array was 16 panels mounted on the lodge roof and connected to a battery bank in a utility room off the main hallway. The installation was clean and relatively recent. The panels had been serviced in February as part of the maintenance schedule, and every battery cell in the bank was at full charge. The system was outputting enough power to run the refrigeration, the water pump, the lights, and the desalination unit simultaneously with capacity remaining. There was also a diesel generator behind the maintenance shed with a 200-liter tank that was roughly half full. I made a deliberate decision not to use the generator. Solar was silent. Diesel makes noise. Noise on the water carries. I noted the generator and its fuel level on my own list and moved on. The desalination unit was on the south shore of the island, a compact commercial reverse osmosis system originally fed from shore power and now running off the solar battery bank. I tested the output flow. It was clean, colorless, tasted flat in the way desalinated water always does. We had running water indefinitely as long as the solar system held. By the end of day one, the picture was clear. Clean water, frozen and canned food for weeks, functional renewable power, a full tool inventory, access to the sea for fishing, and an island with only 2 practical access points, the North Causeway and the 2 docks. Marcus laid the numbers out at the kitchen table that evening on his legal pad. He estimated the frozen stores at 30 to 40 days for 3 people with disciplined portioning. The dry goods extended that significantly. Fishing could cover protein needs for as long as we were willing to fish. "We need to block the causeway," I said. Marcus had already drawn a rough map of the island and circled the causeway in pen. "First thing tomorrow morning," he said. "And lights out discipline at night," I said. "If we're running lights visible from the water, anyone on a boat with binoculars can see us from 2 miles, possibly further if the sky is clear." Reed was eating from a can of sliced peaches with a fork he had found in the kitchen drawer. "People coming is not automatically a bad thing," he said. "We have space." "Depends who comes," I said. Reed ate his peaches. Nobody argued the point any further that night. The causeway work started day 2. I had spent 9 years doing structural repairs on marine infrastructure, and I knew what the salt air and tidal variation did to materials over time. I chose the aluminum pipe and chain link over lumber because aluminum does not rust and chain link does not crack. We cut 3 lengths of aluminum pipe from the maintenance shed stock, drove 2 of them into the sandy ground at the island end of the causeway using the hand sledge, cross-braced them with the 3rd pipe, and zip-tied a full panel of chain link across the frame, 4 meters wide, about 1.5 meters tall. It was not a fortress. A motivated group of people with tools could cut through it in a few minutes. That was not the point. The point was that the fence could not be slipped through quietly. Anyone trying to pass had to make effort and noise was what we needed. Time to respond is more useful than a barrier that simply stops people. A barrier that stops people invites them to find another way around. A barrier that costs time and makes noise gives you the warning you need to respond. We added a second layer of chain link about a meter behind the first panel, creating a short fence channel. Then I strung a tripwire between two tent stakes at ankle height, 20 centimeters behind the second panel, and tied 6 empty metal condiment containers from the kitchen to it with wire. Shake the outer fence, and the second panel barely moves. Push through or cut through the second panel, and you step on the wire line. 6 metal containers rattle at once in the dark. It was not a sophisticated alarm system. It was a noise trap. Noise was what we were building toward at every step. By day 4 on the island, we had settled into a daily structure. Fishing from 6 to 8 in the morning from the South Rocks, using gear from the resort dive shop, rods, reels, monofilament line, weights, and a tackle box full of lures that the resort had stocked for the guest angling program. The South Rocks were productive. Grouper, snapper, a few jack crevalle. Marcus and I used the kitchen smoker to cure what we didn't eat immediately, working in small batches. Reed took the perimeter walk, twice daily, 7 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. He checked the causeway fence, checked the dock cleats and the Coralese lines, checked the south pier behind the maintenance shed. He was punctual about it, and he never needed to be reminded, which was a better contribution than I had expected from him. Whatever his judgment problems, Reed was not lazy. On day 5, we saw the first smoke column from the mainland. Marcus was on the lodge roof doing a panel check and called down to me. I climbed up and he handed me the binoculars. A thick, black column rising from the direction of the port district, and beside it, a grey column, thinner, from further north. By the time I handed the binoculars back, there was a third column forming south of the first 2. Marcus stayed on the roof for 20 minutes counting the sources. He came down and we ate dinner, and he said nothing directly about what the smoke meant. Neither did Reed. We all understood it. The mainland was getting worse. Every fire that was burning, every structure that was open or destroyed, was a source of movement toward the water. Boats drift. People with boats make decisions based on what they can see. From 11 miles offshore in the dark, an island with interior lighting is visible at a distance that makes it interesting. I had Marcus help me cut dark fabric from the staff linen closets and pin it over the lodge windows that same evening. Not a perfect blackout, but enough to stop direct light leakage from the main interior rooms. We left the kitchen range hood light on the theory that the exhaust vents pointed upward and the light was contained. Every other light-producing source in the lodge was blocked or shut off before 9. On day 6, I found a lockbox in the dive shop office that held 2 flare guns and 9 cartridges. I moved them to a locked cabinet in the kitchen storage room. Marcus had a key. I had a key. Reed did not have a key. When Reed noticed that he did not have a key, he did not say anything about it, which told me he had worked out the reasoning without needing it explained. The resort bar was fully stocked. Liquor, wine, kegged beer. Reed wanted access. Marcus said 2 drinks per person per day, logged by name in the margin of his legal pad. Reed agreed. On day 7, I found 3 unlogged empty beer bottles in the kitchen recycling bin. I brought it up with Reed directly and quietly. I was thirsty, he said. We have water and it's unlimited, I said. The beer is logged, all of it. He did not do it again that week. I kept track. On day 8, we had visitors. I was on the north dock checking the Coralese fuel line when I heard a small outboard motor coming from the north. Not a large engine, not a cruiser. A high whine, pushed hard, carrying weight. I stood and looked, and saw a fiberglass runabout coming in with too many people aboard and sitting lower in the water than its draft was designed for. 5 people, a man at the throttle, a woman beside him, one hand on the gunwale and the other near the shoulder of a teenage boy. A heavy-set older man in the stern with his left forearm wrapped in a hotel towel, and a lean, still man in a grey jacket sitting in the bow with a duffel bag between his feet, not holding the rail, not watching the water, watching the island. I called Marcus from the lodge. He came out with the binoculars. We both looked at the arm wrapped in the towel. Let them dock, I said. Keep back from the boarding point. I want to see the arm before anything else happens. Reed had come up from the south path and had his bow case unzipped by the time I turned around. I looked at him. He zipped it back. The runabout came alongside the north dock. The man at the throttle cut the engine and stepped up onto the dock with both hands raised before he said a word. His name was Dan Harmon. He introduced himself in the careful way of someone who understood the situation he was arriving into, clearly, with names and facts and no dramatic framing. Wife Lisa, son Eli, 15 years old. The man with the injured arm was Gordo, a hotel cook. The man in the bow was Theo, and Dan said he did not know his last name. I went to the boat and unwrapped Gordo's arm myself, right there on the dock. Thermal burn. The back of his left forearm and the outer edge of his hand. Blistered skin across the tissue, the kind of wound you get from a hot metal surface or a burning door frame. Not from contact with a person. Not a bite. Not a scratch from fingernails. A cooking burn from a fire. I rewrapped it carefully using the clean side of the towel and looked at Gordo's face. He held steady through the handling without pulling back, which told me he'd been managing the pain without complaint for at least 2 days. "How did the burn happen?" I asked him. "Kitchen fire at the hotel," he said. "Cape Coral. Crowd came through the lobby and knocked the gas lines. I was the last one out of the kitchen." He paused. The door had already started going. I told him we could treat it and that he needed to let me do it daily. Then I looked at Dan Harmon. "Tell me exactly where you came from and what you saw." He told me. They had been at a Cape Coral waterfront marina when a crowd came through the parking structure. He described what he saw in the crowd. People who were not moving the way people move when they are panicked or disoriented. People who were tracking. His words. He said he got his family to the runabout and shoved off. They were running low on fuel about 2 miles out when they spotted the island. I looked at Theo, who had not yet moved from the bow. "You coming up?" "Yes," he said. He climbed onto the dock with his duffel and looked around the island in a slow, deliberate arc, studying the layout. Not nervous, assessing. Theo Marsh, I learned later, was a retired telecommunications technician who had spent 15 years in the maritime communication industry before taking early retirement to live on a sailboat in Fort Myers Beach. He was 57. He had been monitoring emergency frequencies since day 3 of the outbreak, and he had a portable radio transceiver in that duffel bag, along with batteries, a spare antenna, and 2 notebooks full of handwritten frequency logs. That evening, all 8 of us sat at the kitchen table. The first time I had sat in a group since the outbreak started, and tried to establish what the rules were going to be. I already knew this was the part I was less equipped for than anything else. Marcus ran it. He laid out the inventory numbers plainly, no editorializing. Food for how long? Water indefinitely. Power stable. Defense position manageable for a small group. He gave everyone the same information and let them sit with it. Dan Harmon said they had brought supplies. Protein bars, sealed rice, dried beans, bottled water, coffee. Marcus wrote it all down and added it to the running total. Then Theo set the transceiver on the table. He plugged in a folded antenna and looked at the group. He said the emergency frequency traffic had been heavy through the first week and was now becoming fragmentary. Organized National Guard communications were still active, but the information they were sharing suggested the containment model had broken down across the central Gulf Coast. Tampa was no longer being described as managed. A camp north of Naples had gone silent 2 days prior after a week of consistent broadcasts. Naval operations at Mayport were ongoing, but not available to civilians. Nobody said anything for a while after Theo finished. Reed said, "So we stay here." "Until the situation changes," I said. "We work. We maintain the position. We do not get comfortable or sloppy. The island is a good position, but it is not permanent shelter if we treat it badly." The next morning I laid out the rules for the full group. Not suggestions. Not a discussion topic. Rules. No noise after 8 in the evening. No light visible from the water at night. Food from the kitchen twice daily, portioned and logged. The alcohol cabinet stays locked. 2 drinks per adult per day, logged by name. The dive shop stays locked unless work is actively being done. The maintenance shed stays locked. Nobody goes to the causeway alone. Nobody takes a boat out alone. If you find something unusual, you wake 2 people before you act on it. If you are sick or injured, you tell someone immediately. No delay, no hiding. That last rule needed to be stated out loud and clearly, after what Dan Harmon had described seeing in the Cape Coral Marina, and after the Tampa footage, and after 8 days of accumulating understanding of what these things were and how they worked. Everyone at that table knew what a bite meant. A bite was not something you treated privately and hoped improved. A bite required immediate disclosure. If it turned out to be nothing, fine. If it turned out to be something, concealing it was not just a risk to the person hiding it. It was a risk to everyone in every room of the lodge and every bungalow on the island. Dan Harmon nodded slowly when I said that. He looked at Eli. Eli was watching the table. Lisa Harmon asked about Gordo's burn and whether we could treat it properly. I told her we had burn dressings in the first aid kit and that I had found a sealed staff infirmary kit in the lodge maintenance closet containing silver sulfadiazine cream, which is the correct treatment for a thermal burn of that depth. I said it needed twice daily cleaning and fresh dressing, and that Gordo needed to flag any change in appearance immediately. Then I looked at Gordo and said, "That means you tell me if it gets warm, swells, starts draining anything unusual, or smells different. Not in 2 days, the same day it happens." Gordo said, "You a doctor?" "Mechanic," I said. "I know what the instructions on the label say. I'm the most qualified person we have." He held up his arm without further comment. I cleaned the wound, applied the cream, and redressed it. He did not make a sound through any of it. Gordo turned out to be a significant asset in ways that had nothing to do with his injury. He had worked professional kitchens for 20 years, starting as a line cook in his early 20s, and rising to executive chef at a mid-sized hotel in Cape Coral before the outbreak. He took over the kitchen the day after he arrived. Within 1 day he had reorganized the pantry alphabetically by category, labeled every item in the walk-in freezer with a date and apportioned weight, and written a 10-day meal plan on the back of a resort dinner menu, using the available ingredients and the expected fishing yields. He cooked 2 meals daily, every day, using everything. Fish bones for broth, vegetable trimmings in a compost bin, and he did all of it with one functional hand and one that could grip loosely but could not take weight. He did not ask for any recognition, and he did not complain about the hand. The Harmons moved into one of the larger Northside bungalows. Dan Harmon was a high school history teacher, which meant he was organized and good at explaining things to Eli. He took the morning causeway check with Reed on day 10, which gave Reed the afternoon shift and freed Marcus and me to concentrate on the building work. Lisa Harmon handled the resort laundry system once she found that it was powered by the solar bank, and within 2 days, everyone on the island had clean clothes, which had a surprisingly strong effect on the overall mood. Theo set up his radio operation in the staff laundry room, which had no windows and was sufficiently isolated from the rest of the lodge that the faint transceiver sounds did not carry. He listened for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, and kept his notebook current. He did not immediately share everything he heard. That bothered me until I understood his system. He was separating transmissions that were actionable from transmissions that were only distressing, and he brought the actionable ones forward. The rest he logged but did not report, on the basis that information without a corresponding available action only adds to the weight people are carrying. I could not entirely disagree with that reasoning, though I told him the filter decision was mine to make, not his. Reed watched Theo. I noticed it within 2 days of the full group being together. Reed finding reasons to pass the laundry room, checking where Theo was in the schedule. When I asked Reed about it, he said, "He doesn't talk much." "He talks when something needs saying," I said. "I don't know what he's doing in there by himself." "Listening to frequencies that tell us what is happening on the water within 20 miles of this island," I said. "That information is more useful to our survival than almost anything else we have." Reed dropped it for a few days. He kept watching. By day 12, the group had a functioning daily structure. Mornings covered fishing, maintenance tasks, and the perimeter check. Afternoons covered construction work, food preservation, and equipment upkeep. Evenings covered the meal, Theo's radio update, and a brief open discussion of any item that required group input. Lights off by 9. The afternoon construction work was proceeding better than I expected. We had extended the causeway barrier to cover the full 4-meter deck width, with 2 complete layers of chain link on a reinforced pipe frame. Marcus and I added a third panel of fence material at the sandbar end of the causeway, creating a fenced approach channel about 12 meters long that anyone crossing from the water would have to pass through before reaching the main island fence. The noise system was expanded. 6 noise cans behind the outer panel, 6 behind the middle panel, and a second tripwire further back with 10 cans. Anyone moving through that channel with any speed at all would produce a sound level audible from the lodge at 40 meters. I dragged 3 steel-framed patio sun loungers to either side of the causeway island entrance and positioned them as close approach obstacles. They weighed about 40 kilograms each when I filled the frame bases with sand from the shore, which I did with a bucket over the course of an afternoon. A single person could not move one of them quickly. The funneling effect meant anyone coming off the causeway was directed into a 1.5 meter gap between the obstacles, directly in front of the inner fence. 2 people managing that gap could handle a much larger problem than 2 people spread across an open dock. We also dragged pool fencing from the resort pool area, the aluminum-framed panels that the resort used to define the pool perimeter, and positioned 2 sections along the north dock face, blocking the open dock edge on either side of the Coralie's berth. Anyone stepping off a boat at the north dock now had to pass through or over a barrier before reaching the island path. It was imperfect fencing. It created noise and delay. That was what it was for. On day 14, Reed came back from the afternoon perimeter walk and reported that Bungalow 7's door was not fully latched. He checked the others, and they were fine. Bungalow 7 was the farthest south in the north cluster, closest to the water. Not damaged, just not seated in the latch properly, which meant it had been that way since day 1 when we had done the initial walkthrough. Reed said he had not gone in because he heard movement inside. I went with Marcus. We took the hatchet and a flashlight. The door was ajar about 3 centimeters. I pushed it open with my boot and stood back. It was a tabby cat. Large, well-fed at some recent point, now thin. Sitting on top of the wardrobe cabinet with its tail moving in short arcs, looking at us with flat amber eyes. It hissed once. It did not move from the cabinet. Marcus looked at the cat for several seconds. "That works," he said. We left a container of water and a portion of fish scraps on the floor. The cat stayed in Bungalow 7 and over the following weeks became, without anyone formally deciding it, part of the perimeter system. It was a quiet animal that we rarely saw during the day. At night it roamed the bungalow row and the path behind the lodge. If it was visible and calm when we passed Bungalow 7 on a morning check, the south end of the north cluster was undisturbed. If it had retreated to the top of the wardrobe, something had moved near the building. The first time we saw one in the water was day 15. Early morning, just past sunrise. I was coiling dock rope on the north pier when I saw movement about 60 meters out, in the channel between the dock and the sandbar. Something was in the water, moving slowly toward the island, moving without purposeful coordination, drifting with a slight current but also pushing forward, a combination of water movement and something that was still operating enough to direct itself toward the landmass. I watched it for 3 minutes before going to get Marcus. We watched together from behind the dock equipment cage. Male, I estimated, or had been, moving through water that was about 1.5 meters deep at low tide, which meant it was walking the bottom with its upper section above the surface. No reaction to us watching, no change in movement, just a general orientation toward the island, slow and continuous. Mangrove roots on the south edge of the bar, Marcus said. If it tracks the current, it'll drift into them before it reaches the causeway. He was right. It reached the south edge of the sandbar and pushed into the mangrove fringe. The root structure caught it, and it moved against the roots without finding a way through. We checked it at noon from the dock. Still there, still moving against the mangroves. By the evening perimeter check, it had drifted back on the outgoing tide and was gone. Marcus and I stood on the north dock after the evening check and talked through what we had seen. The water was a delay, not a barrier. The mangroves were not fencing. A single one from the mainland could reach this island at the right combination of tide, current, and approach angle. What the mangroves and the depth gave us was not guaranteed protection. It was a statistical reduction in approach. Most of the time, most of what came from the coast would be slowed or stopped. Not all of it. Not forever. We added the third chain link panel to the causeway landward end the following afternoon. We also began mapping the south shore at low tide, identifying the areas where the sand flat was shallowest and most navigable. And what do you think? Would you have stayed on the island or moved on at this point? Write it in the comments below. I read every single one. Theo reported that evening that the emergency frequency traffic had increased over the previous 48 hours. Not organized communication, fragments, people broadcasting on open marine bands asking for position confirmation, reporting what they were seeing, calling out location names. He had recorded one transmission from a vessel approximately 11 miles offshore on a bearing that put it in our general direction. The vessel had broadcast twice and then stopped. He didn't know the vessel type or how many people were on it. I told Marcus privately after the group session. We agreed to add a nighttime watch rotation, 2-hour shifts from the dive shop window, which faced north over the open water. I excluded Gordo because his arm needed rest, and I excluded Eli because he was 15, and I was not putting a 15-year-old alone at a watch post in the dark. Dan Harmon objected briefly to the exclusion of Eli and then accepted it. On day 16, I went looking for Theo at 2 in the afternoon and could not find him in the laundry room. His transceiver was there, plugged in, antenna raised, but Theo was not. I checked the bungalows, the kitchen, the south path. Then I checked the boathouse. The boathouse sat at the south pier behind the maintenance shed. It held the resort's kayak rack and a small inflatable dinghy with a 4-horsepower outboard. The door was latched from the inside. I knocked. Pause. Then the latch clicked, and Theo opened the door. He had a second radio set up in there. A longer antenna mounted to the south-facing transom of the dinghy, a different receiver model, and a notepad covered in handwritten frequency entries and timestamps with shorthand notes beside them. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Marine band monitoring," he said. "Specifically the recreational boater frequencies. The emergency bands are becoming less useful, too much traffic and too much noise. The marine bands still carry direct boat-to-boat communication, and the vessels in range are on those frequencies, not the emergency channels." "You are going to bring this to the group when?" He picked up the notepad and held it out. I looked at the most recent entries. One entry from 2 days prior read, 2 male voices, tone, planning, mention of Lit Island, bearing 270 from their stated position, estimated distance from their description, 5 to 7 miles. I read it twice. Bearing 270 from a vessel 5 to 7 miles from us, pointed almost directly at our position. "Why didn't you bring this to me?" I said. "I needed more entries to establish a pattern," he said. "A single transmission could be anyone. 2 transmissions with consistent bearing references establish a monitoring pattern. I wanted the second data point before I reported." "Theo," I said, "your filter is not your call to apply. You bring everything to me and Marcus. We decide what the group needs and when. That is the arrangement." He nodded. "Understood." I told Marcus that same evening. We checked every window in every bungalow and the lodge the following morning and found 2 with visible light leakage from outside. One was the Harmon bungalow, where Eli had been reading at night with the curtain gap open. The other was Reed's. I spoke to both separately. Dan Harmon was apologetic and corrected it within the hour. Reed said he could not sleep in total darkness. "Then you manage that," I said, "because if someone on the water with binoculars can see your window at night, every person on this island shares the consequence of your comfort choice." He taped the curtain gaps that afternoon. I checked it that night from outside. No light visible. On day 20, the storm came in off the Gulf. A fast-moving squall line, not a named system, but solid. Theo's weather radio gave us about 4 hours of warning. We spent those 4 hours moving portable equipment undercover. Golf carts into the maintenance shed, fishing gear into the dive shop, extra lines on the Coralie. Marcus checked every solar panel mounting bracket on the lodge roof and tightened what he could reach. The storm hit at 4 in the afternoon. The rain came sideways in the peak squall, and the palm trees along the north shore bent further than I expected them to, and stayed at that angle for a full hour. The surge pushed water up over the south dock and flooded the lower section of the maintenance path. The lodge stayed dry. The storm pushed things in from the water. In the morning, When Reed and Dan Harmon did the perimeter check, they found 3 bodies on the south shore between the rocks and the maintenance shed path. 2 face down, fully still. 1 moving, on its hands and knees in the wet sand, oriented toward the path, working its way forward. Reed came to get me at a full run. He said 1 word, South Shore. I went with the hatchet. Marcus followed with the aluminum pipe. We handled the situation at the South Shore quickly and without risk to anyone in the group. I will leave the precise details out of this account because they do not add to the record, and they cost something each time they are replayed. What matters is the aftermath. Marcus and I stood at the South Shore afterward and looked at the water for a while without talking. The storm had covered 11 miles of open gulf in a matter of hours and delivered bodies to our shoreline. The water was a statistical reduction in threat, not a guarantee. That had been the theory. The South Shore made it fact. I called a full group meeting in the kitchen that morning. I told them exactly what had happened, what it meant, and what we were doing about it. I watched Eli's face when I described the South Shore situation. Lisa Harmon's hand was flat on the table. Gordo was looking at his bandaged arm. Reed sat straight. We extend the perimeter to the South Shore, I said. There are concrete anchor blocks behind the maintenance shed, 12 of them, roughly 40 kilograms each. We move them to the South Shore above the high water line and string noise wire between them. Same system as the causeway. We're not building a wall. We're building an early warning line along the most vulnerable approach. Gordo said, I can move blocks. Give me a cart. We spent the afternoon doing exactly that. 12 blocks on the golf cart flatbed, 2 trips, positioned in a line about 2 meters above the high water mark along the South Shore section between the rocks and the maintenance path. Noise wire at ankle height. 10 more cans. The tab cat from Bungalow 7 watched us from behind the maintenance shed the entire time and did not move until we were done. The south perimeter was never going to be as controlled as the causeway. The shoreline was too irregular, but it now had a noise line along its accessible section, and the mangrove fringe on both ends of the South Shore was dense enough that silent approach through it was not practical. Anyone or anything coming from the water to the south was going to make noise. That was what the system was for. On day 22, Gordo's arm showed the first signs of infection. I found it during the morning dressing change. The skin margin around the wound had gone warm and taken on a red cast that had not been there 2 days prior, and there was a small amount of cloudy fluid at the edge of the burn under the dressing. Not extensive, but the direction was clear and it was early stage, which meant we still had time to manage it if we moved immediately. I told Gordo what I was seeing and what it meant. He looked at his arm and said, "Do we have antibiotics?" "No," I said. "The staff infirmary kit has silver sulfadiazine cream and standard dressings. No systemic antibiotics. I've checked every cabinet on this island twice." Marcus and I talked that evening. The supply run we had been deferring was no longer optional. Gordo needed amoxicillin or a comparable antibiotic within a few days. Without it, a surface infection in compromised tissue with limited circulation, and the burned area had reduced blood flow, could progress to a systemic problem in a man whose overall health was already being run down by physical labor, incomplete sleep, and the demands of feeding 8 people twice a day with 1 functional hand. "I'll go," I said. Marcus said he would come with me. I told him no. One of us needed to stay on the island. If I came back to find Reed had been making decisions in my absence, that was recoverable. If neither Marcus nor I was present for several hours, the dynamic shifted in ways I didn't trust. Marcus looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Take Theo." It was the right call. Theo was quiet and observant, and did not act before assessing. He also knew the water and could navigate the inlet approach using his radio frequency knowledge to check for any vessel activity in the channel. I asked Theo that night. He said yes before I had finished explaining the destination. We left at 5:45 the next morning, well before full light, in the Coralie, with the secondary fuel tank topped off. 40 minutes across flat water to the coast. I came in east of the main marina district, which was the approach I had thought through. A public boat ramp east of the waterfront commercial strip, away from the places most likely to have people moving through them. The ramp was empty, no other boats. I cut the engine and let us drift to the dock. When I stepped off and looked at the shore, What I saw was different from what I had left behind 11 days earlier. Broken windows in the waterfront buildings. 2 overturned vehicles in the parking lot, one of them on its side. A small boat beached sideways on the concrete ramp, abandoned, no one visible in it. Somewhere 3 or 4 blocks inland there was a fire going, small, residential, the kind that burns from a ruptured gas line without anyone present to contain it. No visible movement on foot, but a set of sounds coming from the nearest street that I was familiar with by now. Not voices, the other kind. We moved fast. I had my tool bag with the rebar and the first aid kit. Theo had his duffel. We crossed the parking lot at a run, went through a broken chain-link gate at the lot's north edge, and moved along the service road behind the waterfront commercial strip. The marine supply warehouse was 3 blocks north and 1 block west. I had used it for parts supply for years, and I knew the layout from the loading dock door to the pharmacy section in the back. The side entry I had used for deliveries was padlocked. I hit the padlock shackle with the rebar at a 45-degree angle, twice, and it gave on the second strike. I stopped at the open door and listened for 30 seconds before we went in. Dark, no movement, no sound that indicated anything was inside that had not been there before the outbreak. We went in. The warehouse was intact, shelving untouched, stock in place. I went directly to the pharmacy counter at the back. The over-the-counter items were on open shelving. The prescription-grade marine medical supplies were behind a locked glass panel. I broke the panel with the rebar and read labels. Amoxicillin, 500 milligrams. 2 bottles of 20 tablets each. Ciprofloxacin, 2 bottles. Industrial-grade ibuprofen. Wound closure tape, 4 packs. Sterile gauze rolls, 6. A sealed intravenous saline bag, which I took even though I hoped we would never need it, and was not sure I could use it correctly if we did. Beyond the medical section, I took 3 coils of marine rope, a box of marine-grade stainless steel fasteners, 2 sets of engine hose clamps that matched the Coralie's specifications, a hand bilge pump, and 2 sealed 5-liter containers of diesel engine oil. Theo had gone to the marine communications supply shelf without being directed, and was loading a frequency reference handbook, a spare antenna connector set, and 2 sealed battery packs into his duffel. We were inside for 11 minutes. On the way back to the boat, I saw 2 of them moving 1 block over, between parked vehicles on the cross street. They were not oriented toward us. I moved to the right side of the service road and went low behind a commercial dumpster until they had passed the intersection. Theo was behind me, 3 steps back, making no sound. He had seen them at the same time I did. We reached the ramp and I untied the lines while Theo started the Coralie. We were in the inlet by 7:35, on open water at 7:50. Neither of us said anything until the coast was 2 miles behind us and nothing was following on the water. Theo said, "That went well." "It went fast," I said. "Fast is what went well." Back on the island, I started Gordo on amoxicillin that afternoon. 500 milligrams twice daily with food for 10 days, matching the dosage information on the label and cross-referenced against the reference guide I had taken from the warehouse. Gordo took the first tablet with water and went back to prep work for the evening meal without comment. 48 hours later, the redness at the wound margin was retreating. By day 28, the wound was fully dry, the infection gone. Gordo had reduced use of 2 fingers on his left hand from the scar tissue, but he was working at roughly 80% capacity. I had not been certain when the infection first appeared that we would reach that outcome. I was glad to be wrong in the right direction. The group dynamic was shifting in ways that were harder to address than infrastructure problems. Reed and Dan Harmon had been spending increasing amounts of time together over days 12 through 20. It was gradual. They ate together most mornings. They sat near each other at the evening radio briefings. Their morning causeway checks, which should have been brief and functional, were running long. I started tracking the clock. Reed had a particular way of describing the rules and rationing arrangements that made them sound like personal preferences rather than operational necessities, as if the discipline was something Marcus and I had chosen out of caution that more comfortable people might reasonably set aside. He never said that directly to Marcus or me. He said it to Dan Harmon and, I suspected, to Lisa Harmon during the time she spent in the laundry room. Dan Harmon was tired, worried about his family, and had not slept fully since before the outbreak. He was receptive to easier interpretations of the situation. On day 29, I found them at the south dock near the boathouse, talking. Reed was describing the inflatable dinghy's outboard and its range. He was suggesting that a short run north along the barrier island chain to survey other available locations would give us options if the island became untenable. Dan was saying it sounded like a reasonable idea. I walked over. The dinghy stays on the south pier, I said. We've discussed this. No exploratory runs without a specific destination, a specific need, and a group decision. Reed said, We're not going anywhere. We're talking through options. Then bring the options to the group at the evening meeting where everyone can weigh in, I said. Dan looked between us. He does have a point, Nolan. Having a backup plan is worth thinking about. We have a backup plan, I said. What we don't have is a reason to execute it today, which is what a fuel-using, engine noise-producing exploratory run represents. The moment there is a specific reason to use the dinghy for a specific purpose, we discuss it together. Reed walked away. Dan stayed. I'm not trying to undercut you, Dan said. I know, I said, but Reed is, and he's been using you to do it without your realizing it. You're a reasonable person, and he presents things to you in reasonable-sounding ways. I need you to notice that. Dan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's a hard thing to say about someone. Yes, I said. It's accurate. Dan went back to the lodge. He was quiet at dinner that evening. Reed noticed and said nothing. On day 30, Theo called me to the laundry room at 9 in the morning. His frequency log was open to the current page. He had caught a marine band transmission 2 nights prior. Male voice, speaking to at least one other person off mic, describing a lit island to the south of their position. The word used in the transmission was stocked. The bearing placed the transmitting vessel to our north-northwest, estimated 5 to 6 miles out. Theo had held the entry for 36 hours to see if a confirming transmission appeared. It had. The second transmission came from the same source, same marine frequency, and had mentioned a solar array. I looked at the log. How certain are you this is us? There are no other operating island locations with visible solar lighting within that bearing at that distance, he said. Yes, it is us. I told Marcus immediately. We called the full group into the kitchen 15 minutes later. I told them directly. Someone on the water had identified our island by its lights, described it to a companion as stocked, and had now transmitted twice. I did not soften the word stocked. I did not tell them it probably meant nothing. I told them what the word meant in the context of someone who had been watching our island from the water in the dark. It meant they were thinking about what we had, not about whether there was room for more people. Lisa Harmon asked whether we could simply call out to them on the radio and talk. The moment we transmit, they have our frequency, and they have confirmation that we're here and operational, I said. Right now they have a visual. They don't have a direct line. We hold the information advantage for as long as we don't transmit. Reed said, They might just need help. If they need help, we can discuss that when they arrive, I said. What we're doing right now is preparing for the version of their arrival that is not friendly. If they turn out to be friendly, we lose nothing by being prepared. If they turn out not to be friendly, and we were not prepared, we lose everything. Marcus said, What specifically do we need? A night watch station with clear water visibility to the north, I said. The dive shop window on the north side of the lodge. Someone in that window from sundown to sunrise, 2-hour rotations. 6 adults on the rotation. If you see anything on the water moving toward the island without announcing itself on approach, you wake 2 people before anything else. I brought the 2 flare guns from the locked cabinet to the dive shop. I loaded the spear gun from the dive shop equipment rack, a pneumatic single-shot model rated to 10 meters, and placed it on the shelf next to the flare guns. I set 2 of the steel patio umbrella poles in the corner behind the dive shop door. The night watches began that evening. Marcus first shift, me second, midnight to 2, Theo third, 2 to 4, Dan fourth, 4 to 6. The first 2 nights were quiet, the third night as well. On day 32, Eli brought me a marine chart he had found rolled in a cardboard tube behind the filing cabinet in the dive shop office. a detailed nautical chart of the coastal waters from Fort Myers Beach to Captiva. He set it on the kitchen table without being asked, and unrolled one end to show me what it was. That was the first proactive thing he had done since arriving on the island. I thanked him, and meant it. Marcus, Theo, and I spread the chart on the table that evening. We marked our island position, drew the bearing from Theo's transmission entries, and estimated the range. 3 locations within the probable source area: a marina complex, a public ramp with a parking structure, and a waterfront bar and restaurant with a fuel dock. Theo pointed at the fuel dock. "If they're running a large capacity vessel," he said, "the fuel dock is the logical staging point, wide enough for a pontoon or flat-bottom tour cruiser, close enough to our position to run without consuming significant fuel." "You've heard a large outboard?" I asked. In the background of the transmissions, the engine sound coming through the radio when they key the mic. Not a cruiser motor, higher frequency, multiple cylinders, high torque, the kind of motor on a pontoon tour boat or a shallow draft bay cruiser, a vessel capable of carrying 12 to 15 people. Marcus looked at the chart. He said quietly, "If they bring a full load, the causeway fence is not the answer." "The fence buys time," I said. "I'm working on what we do with the time." I spent the next 2 days thinking about the service tunnel. I had found it on day 3 during the full island inventory and had noted it and moved on. It ran under the main lodge, from the kitchen utility room on the north side to a steel floor hatch on the south side near the base of the maintenance shed, about 40 meters long, low concrete ceiling, 1 meter wide passage with pipe conduit along one wall. The resort staff had used it to move supplies and equipment between buildings without passing through the guest-facing front areas. The south hatch opened approximately 30 meters from the south pier where the Coralie was moored. I checked the tunnel with Marcus. Clear of obstruction, south hatch functional, stiff from humidity, but it opened with shoulder pressure. We moved the critical stores into the tunnel entrance, the medications, Theo's radio equipment, the tool bag, and 3 days of portioned food in sealed bags. We added a battery lantern at the north entrance and a coil of dock rope at the south hatch exit. I told Marcus the tunnel was our exit if the north side was compromised, not a defensive position, a departure route. He understood without me needing to explain the reasoning. By the way, if this is the kind of story you want to see more of, subscribe right now. And tell me in the comments, at what point in Nolan's account would you have made a different call? On day 34, the infected reached the causeway in a group for the first time. I was at the South Shore anchor line checking the noise cans when I heard Reed's voice calling from the north side. Not panicked, urgent, I ran the center path to the causeway. 7 of them on the sandbar, moving toward the causeway approach channel with more directional consistency than anything I had seen in the water. They had found the gap in the mangrove fringe on the channel side of the bar, the gap we had identified on day 16 and had not fully addressed before the storm. They came through it at low tide and were tracking the solid deck surface of the causeway toward the island. The first one reached the outer fence panel. It pressed against the chain link with both hands open, fingers through the mesh. The noise cans rattled hard. The second one arrived within seconds and added pressure to the same section. The fence bowed slightly and held. Reed had an arrow knocked on the compound bow. I held up one hand without looking at him. Hold, let the fence work. The double-layer fence with the pipe frame took the combined weight and pressure of 4 of them simultaneously without failing. The structure flexed, but the zip-tie joints held across the entire panel. They could not find the mechanism to climb it. They pushed and turned and pressed, but they did not work out the angles needed to climb chain link at that height without coordination. Marcus arrived with the aluminum pipe. Dan Harmon was behind him. I told Dan to go back to the lodge and stay there. He went. After approximately 20 minutes, 4 of the 7 at the fence turned and moved back down the causeway toward the sandbar. No clear reason that I could identify, as though they had reached a fixed endpoint in whatever directed them and were moving to the next location. The remaining 3 stayed at the outer fence. We managed the 3 at the fence through the outer chain link using the aluminum pipe and the umbrella pole through the mesh gaps. It took 4 minutes and required the kind of controlled, deliberate focus that leaves you quiet for a while after it is done. I will not describe it further. It happened, and we finished it, and it stayed with both Marcus and me in ways that had nothing to do with the fence or the tools. After, I reinforced the channel side gap in the mangrove fringe by driving 3 aluminum pipe sections into the sandy bottom on the bar and zip-tying a section of chain link across the opening between the mangrove root line and the causeway deck edge. It was a 30-minute job. I should have done it 2 weeks earlier. Reed was different after the causeway incident. Not dramatically, just quieter. He did his perimeter walks on schedule, and he did not bring up the dinghy or the charter run, or any variation of the idea that there might be a better situation available elsewhere. He sat at the evening meal that night and ate without commentary. I noticed he was watching the north window. On day 37, the boats came. It was 11:40 at night. Theo was on watch in the dive shop window. He saw them first. 2 vessels moving from the north, running without navigation lights. A large, flat-bottomed tour boat, the kind with a wide-open deck and a single outboard tower, and a smaller center console runabout beside it, riding faster, making wider movements. He woke me first, then Marcus, in under a minute, exactly as the protocol required. I was at the dive shop window 90 seconds after being woken. In the moonlight, I could see both vessels clearly. The tour boat was riding low, weight on deck. The runabout was running alongside it. I could see movement on the deck of the tour boat, but I could not count individuals accurately from the dive shop angle. I sent Marcus to wake Dan Harmon with specific instructions. Everyone else stays in their bungalow. No lights. Door closed and latched. Dan stays with his family. Reed came out of his bungalow before I could send anyone. He had the bow out of the case already. I did not send him back. I needed people at the north dock. The tour boat cut its engines about 40 meters from the north dock and coasted in. The runabout moved to the east side of the dock and I heard it bump the pilings. A voice from the tour boat. Male, practice projection. Hello on the island. We're coming alongside. Don't do anything you'll regret. I was standing at the dock edge behind the bollard post in the dark. I did not step into any visible position. Stop where you are. This island is occupied and full. Turn around. We're not here asking, the voice said. We watched this place for 2 days. We know what you have. Then you know we have people watching the dock right now, I said. A short pause, then, kitchen, solar, dock, stores. We've been watching the lights. We know the layout. Someone had stepped off the runabout onto the east dock and was moving up the dock toward the path to the island. I could hear the footsteps on the wooden dock surface. There is a person on the east dock, I said to the voice. Call him back. You're not in a position to call that, the voice said. The tour boat engine came back on, and the vessel pushed forward toward the north dock berth. Marcus was behind the equipment cage to my right. Reed was to my left. Theo was at the lodge doorway with the radio, monitoring the marine channel for any other vessel communication. When the tour boat hull touched the dock pilings, Marcus fired the first flare. Red, high, it burst over the dock and lit the full north side of the island in red-orange for several seconds. In that light I could see 4 people on the tour boat deck, 2 seated at the front bench, 1 at the helm, 1 standing at the starboard rail with something in his hands. The man from the east dock was on the island path, about 25 meters from the lodge, moving at a walk. Reed's arrow hit the aluminum side rail of the tour boat 3 centimeters from the hand of the man at the rail. The sound rang out across the water. The man pulled his hand back. You shot at us. The next one is not an advisory shot, I said. I was holding the spear gun, leveled at the man at the helm. He was the closest, the most operationally significant, and the one whose removal would affect the boat's mobility. 10 meters, within the rated range of the gun. I want to be clear about what was happening in my head at that moment. I had spent 37 days making decisions on this island based on information, planning, and what the situation actually required. I was aware that I was pointing a loaded weapon at a person, and that using it had a specific set of consequences that I could not reverse. I was also aware that the man on the path was getting closer to the lodge where Dan Harmon's family was inside a closed bungalow door with nothing between them and that path. I said to Marcus, East Dock Path. 2 words. Marcus moved from the cage to the island path at a run. I heard fast footsteps, then contact, then the aluminum pipe striking something hard, twice, in a short sequence, then quiet from the path. The voice from the tour boat said something quiet to the people around him. The engine revved. The boat began pulling back from the dock. "This is not finished," the voice said. "Come back in daylight with fewer people and we'll have a conversation," I said. "In the dark with a full deck, it ends the same way it did tonight." The tour boat pulled out and moved north with the runabout alongside. They were 200 meters out within a minute. No lights, moving steadily. I lowered the spear gun. Reed was still holding his position with the bow half raised, watching the water. Marcus came back from the path. He had a scrape across his right palm from the dock surface, but nothing else. The man from the path had retreated when Marcus came at him. I told the group 10 minutes later, in the kitchen, what had happened and what I expected. They were not gone. The voice had said exactly what he meant, and I had no reason to think he'd said it for dramatic effect. They had identified the resort, assessed what it contained, and attempted to take it. They had retreated when the attempt encountered resistance. The question was not whether they were coming back. The question was when and how. "What do we do?" Dan said. "We move everyone into the lodge," I said. "Bungalows are too exposed. The lodge is concrete block with internal shutters. Gordo has the kitchen. Theo stays on the radio. Marcus and I take the door positions. Reed covers the north window with the bow." "What about sleeping?" Lisa Harmon said. "In shifts," I said. "Same as any other night watch. We don't know when they're coming back." Eli said, "They're coming back tonight, aren't they?" I looked at him. "Probably," I said. There was no reason to say anything else. Nolan made a call that night that would change everything. What would you have done in his position? Drop it in the comments. I want to know what you think. They came back at 3 in the morning. I had not slept. Neither had Marcus. We had moved everyone into the lodge kitchen and inner hallway. Gordo had laid out the heavy kitchen knives in a row on the counter without being asked. Lisa Harmon found the fire extinguisher under the bar and held it. Eli was next to her, not talking, not asking questions, watching whatever door his mother was watching. Dan was in the hallway with a steel pipe from the pool fence rack. They came on both sides this time. The tour boat from the north, the runabout around the east point of the island, using the south pier approach, bypassing the north dock and the causeway system entirely. And they brought fire. Something launched from the tour boat. I did not see the mechanism, only the result. And the thatch roof of the first bungalow on the north row was burning within 2 minutes of their arrival. The bungalow thatch was dry. The breeze off the water was steady. The fire spread to the second bungalow roof before I had taken 3 steps toward the lodge entrance. Reed pushed past me toward the outside. I grabbed his arm hard. "No, into the lodge, now." He was watching the fire. 2 bungalows and the light was already reaching the path. "That's everything," he said. "The lodge is concrete block and it is not on fire," I said. "Move." He moved. I held the north lodge door and watched the dock path. 2 figures from the tour boat had made the north dock and were on the island path. In the firelight I could see them clearly enough. The one in front was carrying a steel bar. They were moving at purpose. At 8 meters I discharged the spear gun. The man in front went down. The second man stopped and did not advance. I set the spear gun down. Single shot, now empty, and called back through the lodge door to Marcus. "Tunnel. Everyone in the tunnel right now." Marcus had already been moving. He had the battery lantern and the pre-packed supply bags we had stored at the tunnel entrance. Gordo had picked up the cloth bag from under the kitchen counter that he had quietly packed 2 days earlier, the medications, 2 days of portioned food, and the burn dressing kit. He had been thinking about this exact moment and had prepared for it without telling me, which I filed away and thought about later. Theo had his duffel. Lisa had Eli's hand. Dan was at the rear with the steel pipe. Reed was still near the lodge entry, watching through the window. I put a hand on his shoulder and said his name once. He turned and followed. I pulled the north lodge door shut from inside and latched it. Then I pulled the kitchen door shut and latched it. Then I pulled the utility room door shut behind me as I followed the group into the tunnel entrance. Every door between us and the north side of the island, closed, latched. The tunnel was dark except for Marcus's lantern ahead. I could hear the sound of boots on the lodge floor above the ceiling, and something heavy being dragged or struck against the exterior wall. I kept moving, 40 meters at a walk. The lantern cast moving shadows on the concrete walls. Marcus hit the south hatch and pushed. It stuck, the same dampness in the frame that had swelled the wood since the storm, and he pushed again with his shoulder. Gordo came up behind him and added his weight, and the hatch gave outward with a loud bang that I hoped the wind and the fire covered. We came out near the base of the maintenance shed on the south side. The south pier was 30 meters south, and at the south pier, tied at the end berth where I had moved her 3 days prior and told nobody, the Coralie. Marcus saw the boat and looked back at me. I said, "Day before yesterday." He turned without another word and moved toward the pier. Everyone boarded the Coralie in under 2 minutes. 8 people on a 32-foot cruiser rated comfortable for 6, crowded but functional. I started the diesel on the first key cycle. Marcus was already casting the stern line. Theo cast the bow line. The engine was at idle, and we were clear of the dock in 90 seconds. Reed said, "The dinghy. Are we leaving the dinghy?" I looked at the boathouse. "Theo," I said, "boathouse. Drain plug in the transom of the inflatable. Pull it and flip the dinghy hull up. 30 seconds. Theo ran to the boathouse and was back in 45 seconds. "Done," he said. I backed the Coralie away from the south pier. The glow of the bungalow fire was visible above the lodge roofline from this side of the island. At least 3 bungalows burning now, maybe 4, the fire spreading east along the north row. I could see the outline of people on the north dock in the firelight. They were looking at the water to the north, looking for our boats. We were south of the island and moving away from the firelight in the dark, not visible from the north dock. When we were 50 meters from the south pier, I cut the Coralie's engine to idle and let her drift. I went below to the engine compartment. I had placed a length of marine rope through the engine room door to the deck on day 35, tied to the handle of the seacock, the through-hull valve that admitted seawater to cool the diesel engine. A safety precaution in standard operation, a different kind of tool in this application. I opened the seacock to full. Water began entering the bilge at a steady rate. I came back on deck and said to Reed, "She's not going anywhere after tonight." He understood what I had done. "I thought we needed the boat," he said. "We have the dinghy," I said, "and they are not getting a boat that can carry all of them." I powered the Coralie south on a course toward the shallow mangrove flat, about 300 meters from the south pier. I ran her at slow speed until the hull grounded gently on the sandy bottom, about 1.5 meters of water beneath the keel, well within the tidal range. She settled. She was not going to float off on the next tide, not before the seacock finished its work. I had the dinghy, the resort inflatable we had kept separate from the one Theo had disabled, trailing on a dock line from the Coralie's stern. We transferred everyone in 2 loads. 8 people, the supply bags, Theo's duffel, the tool bag, crowded in the inflatable but afloat. Gordo came close to going over the side during the second transfer. The inflatable rocked hard under his weight and he overcorrected, and Marcus caught him by the jacket collar and held him until the boat steadied. Gordo said nothing. He sat in the bow and breathed. When everyone was in the dinghy, I was the last one on the Coralie. I could hear water in the bilge, steady, not yet loud but rising. I climbed down into the dinghy, and Marcus pushed off from the Coralie's hull with an oar. We ran the dinghy's 4-horsepower outboard south at low throttle to reduce noise. The island behind us was lit from the north side, the fire still active on the bungalow row, and I could see the outline of the tour boat at the north dock and figures on the dock surface. None of them were looking south. We ran for 1 hour and 20 minutes. 5 knots carrying 8 people and all our remaining supplies in an inflatable rated for 6. The water was flat. The sky was clear. Nobody said anything for the first 40 minutes. Lisa Harmon said to Eli at some point quietly, "You're doing well." He didn't answer, but he stopped watching the island glow and started watching the dark water ahead. Around the south end of the barrier island chain, following the chart bearing that Marcus held under a flashlight cupped in his palms, we came to the public boat ramp at Estero Island. A paved concrete ramp, a small building behind it, a parking area that was empty. No boats, no vehicles, no movement visible. We pulled the dinghy up the ramp by hand and sat in it for several minutes. Nobody spoke. Reed was holding his forearm where he had a scrape from the dock surface earlier. I cleaned and taped it with the kit from Gordo's bag. It was a surface abrasion, no depth, not from anything that could transmit. I checked it twice, clean. Gordo set down his bag and looked at the building behind the ramp. "Roof looks solid," he said. Marcus said, "Let's check it in daylight." Eli said, "Is the island still there?" I looked north. The glow was still faintly visible at the horizon, light from fire at distance, not from solar panels. "Part of it," I said. We sat there on the boat ramp concrete in the dark until the sky started going grey in the east. Then we stood and checked the building, and it was intact and the door was unlocked, and we went inside and secured it and divided the two shifts, and the first people slept. Theo set up his radio in the corner and began logging the frequencies. Within 30 minutes, he had a partial picture of what was within range. The situation on the coast was not simple, but it was not empty either. There were still operational positions, still people communicating, still fragments of structure in what had seemed from the island like total chaos. We had supplies for several days, tools, the medications, the radio, and 8 people. 7 adults and Eli, who was 15, and had handled everything on the island, and the departure without a single moment that I had to address or manage. He sat next to his father in the ramp building, and watched Theo with the radio, and did not waste anyone's time. Dan Harmon looked at me across the building from where he was sitting with his back against the wall. He said, "I'm sorry about Reed and the dinghy conversation. You were right about that." "It doesn't matter now," I said, and it didn't. Reed was at the window, looking out at the ramp and the water beyond it. He was holding his bow. He had been carrying it since the North Dock confrontation, and I had not seen him set it down except to sleep. I watched him at the window for a while. He had come a long way from the man who had taken 3 unlogged beers on day 7 and argued about the dinghy in private conversations. He had not made the turn I had hoped for in the middle weeks on the island, but he had made it by the end, and end results are what you carry. Gordo heated water on a camp stove we found in a cabinet in the ramp building and made coffee from the sealed tin in the supply bag. He made it in a battered aluminum pot and served it in paper cups from a dispenser on the wall. It tasted like the most functional thing I had experienced in 5 weeks. Marcus sat next to me with his paper cup and looked at the list he had been building in the margin of his legal pad, the running notes he had kept since the first morning on the island. He turned to a blank margin and wrote, "Day 38, 8 people, secure, supplies, radio, next step." That was the shape of it. He did not write anything after next step. There was nothing certain enough to write yet. This is where my account ends. Not because there was no next step. There was. And eventually I may write that down too. But the island account closes at that boat ramp as the sky goes from grey to pale yellow, and Theo starts calling out frequency positions from the corner. We did not keep the paradise. We never had it to keep. What we kept was this: 8 people in a building with the door shut, coffee and paper cups, a radio giving us information, and enough of a working structure between us to decide what the next day looked like. That was enough. That was the whole thing. That's where Nolan's account ends. If you made it all the way through that, you know this is one of the most detailed submissions we've ever read on this channel. The specifics, the fence construction, the medication run, the seacock. Those are the kinds of details that you don't just make up. Whether every word is exactly as it happened, I can't say. But I'll tell you this, it reads like someone who was there. If you have thoughts on Nolan's story, what he did right, what you'd have done differently, or where you think the story goes from that boat ramp, write it in the comments below. These conversations are always worth reading. I check them every day. This has been Jack's Nightmares. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. New accounts go up almost every day. Hope to see you in the next one, and stay safe out there.